Hello everyone, Dr. Feist here again today with Marvin the Martian. We're here to talk to you more about Aristotle, Nicomachean ethics, and I'm continuing on chapter 6, Aristotle's criticisms of Plato's form of the good, or the Platonists, however you want to put it. 6 criticisms in all in this chapter. I've given you a bit of background. Check out the earlier videos on that, a little bit on Aristotle on the categories, a little bit on what probably is what Plato thought about the forms, but again, it's pretty controversial stuff. So have a look at that, and what I want to do now is build on that material and look at some of the criticisms. 6 of them in all, and just in this video, we're going to look at the first 3, and I'll pick the final 3 up in another video, so stay tuned for that. So Aristotle says, look, the Platonists, criticism number 1, he thinks they're inconsistent. And in that sense, he says, look, when it comes to numbers, you've got a logical sequence, right? 1, 2, 3, up to 20, 21, and so on and so on. Nothing too complicated there. But there's an ordering to it. There's prior and posterior. Okay, so there's an order to these things. So 1 is prior to 3, 20 is posterior to 15, or whatever. So there's a certain kind of logical ordering. Now, when there is this logical ordering in a set of items, a set of numbers, there's a logical ordering according to prior and posterior. The Platonists say no form here. So there's no form of number. So keep that in mind. A set of items, logically ordered, no form to that notion. Well, if you look at a set of concepts, and again, if this isn't ringing a bell here, go back and look at what I talked about when I discussed Aristotle's categories. But if you look at substance, quality, relation, and so on, there were about 11 of these. They're also arranged in an order, prior and posterior. Remember, the prior posterior is not temporal. You wouldn't say that 2 is temporally before 20, because you can count them in a different way. You could count down from 20 to 2, and they would still be logically ordered. So the prior posterior is not to be thought of in terms of time. Same thing here. Substance, quality, and relation. Substance is prior in this sense of an ontological or a more fundamental priority to quality and relation would be posterior to substance. However, so once you have the same idea here, the notion of prior and posterior of an ordered set, the Platonists want to say, yeah, there is a form, namely good, that cuts across all of these. So why the difference? So the analogy is running on the idea of that there's something similar between the ordered set of concepts and the ordered set of numbers. In one case you don't get a form, and in the other you do. Seems to be an inconsistency in there. So Aristotle says right off the bat, looks like the Platonists are being inconsistent about this. So there's his first criticism. He says further, when we look at what the Platonists are doing, we find that predicating good across categories, and if that expression, predicating good across categories, throws you, go back and look at the video on Aristotle's categories. But for example, is. When we say that the horse is or exists, we're talking in the category of substance. That is one meaning of is, right? As we saw in an earlier video, that the word is can change its meaning when it's an is of identity or an is of predication. Is means different things. And if you confuse the two or think it is always means the same thing, you're going to run into odd problems. Well, so the notion of, or the concept is, changes as you go across categories. But the notion of good here, they want to say it remains the same. So again, we have kind of an analogy being drawn here that with the is changing, well, the same would seem to hold for the good, but they say no. The notion of good remains the same across the categories. So we have a bit of, a conflict here where they agree that is changing. Good seems to be like is, but they say it's the same. No, good should change as well. So remember what the main thing is here, is that the notion of a form of a good is a general one that doesn't change its meaning over categories, right? They say it's the same, but if you compare it here, it should also follow the pattern of is. So trying to predicate good across categories runs into trouble. Well, you might think, okay, well, maybe the notion of good should just be good within a single category. So that moves us now to criticism 3. Well, even if you try and limit this notion of good as a general notion, but sort of try and restrict it, then say, wow, okay, we'll just do it in one category, you still, says Aristotle, you still get into trouble. So with the is, if you stick to one category, this is how good and is now differ. If you stick to one category, there doesn't seem to be any problem. There's no change in meaning of the word is. That is, it's used synonymously. That term throws you. Go back and look at the categories video. No change in meaning of is. It's used synonymously. Now, in order to follow what Aristotle's doing here, it's a pragmatic type argument. He doesn't think it's a perfect knockdown argument. What he's going to look at is how knowledge is acquired. And there's a link between the meanings of terms and the science that investigates them. When a term has a single meaning, a single science applies to it. When you have more than one science examining a term, means the term's meaning is changing. It's not being used synonymously anymore. Try and make this a little bit more concrete. Look at the word is. Back to our old friend, the sneaky word is. In the category of substance, you have one science that examines it. So when you say the horse is, or the horse exists, and you say, okay, what does the is mean in the category of substance? That's the fundamental meaning of the word is. There's only, within the category of substance, there's only one science that studies is, or the meaning of is, and that science is metaphysics. So the one science, metaphysics. And that studies the fundamental meaning of the word is, what it means to exist. So Aristotle says that metaphysics is the science of being, existence, the is, qua being, without any qualifications. Just purely what does it mean to exist? That's metaphysics. And in the category of substance, it's only metaphysics that studies the is. So within the category of substance, it's a single science studying the word is. In other words, is doesn't change its meaning within that category. But if you look at good in a particular category, and in this one, it's going to be good in the category of time. Again, remember from our discussion of the categories, there's about 11 of them, and time is one of the categories. And a category, just remember, is a way in which things can exist. This is a particularly pure mode of existence. Existence in time is another kind of qualified existence. So, if we look at good in terms of the category of time, of how something exists in time, Aristotle gives us this example. He says, well, the notion of a right moment, that's a way something can exist in time. When you say, yeah, that's the right moment. Well, the problem is Aristotle says the notion of the right moment as an existence in time has as a good, like yes, a good is in the right moment, he says there's more than one science that studies that. For example, when you're talking about the right moment in situations of warfare, well, that's military science that studies the good in terms of the right moment in the category of time. Another thing, the right moment can also be studied by medical science. When is the right thing to medically intervene or not intervene or whatever? The point is that the notion of the category of time, a good in that, can be studied by different sciences. So Aristotle says his main point is this. The category of substance stays the same throughout. One science connected to it, metaphysics. But good in the category of time, in one category, one term, you have more than one science, so you have different meanings. Different meanings of what? Different meanings of good. So even in one category, you run into trouble because good is changing its meaning. And keep in mind, what's the whole point of all this stuff? It's easy to get lost in the forest here, but he's saying that not even within a single category is good a general concept. Good is changing its meaning all the time. So Aristotle's point is that to try and approach ethics with a single notion of good, as the Platonists are doing, runs you into 3 problems, which I've talked about here, 6 in total. I'll talk about that in the next video. But remember, you have 3 main problems to start with. Inconsistency. Sometimes they say it's one thing covers all. Now they're not. Predicating good across categories runs into trouble, as we've seen that is changes its meaning, so is good going to, but the Platonists want to say, no, it doesn't. So that's again another problem with the general view. And then in our third category, our third criticism is that when you put good within one category, is behaves nicely. One science, one category. One meaning, one science, one meaning, one category. Very nice. But good is a term that misbehaves even here. In one category of time, you have different sciences, different meanings. How can you talk about one notion of good when it doesn't even stay stable within one category? Okay, so there's the first 3 first criticisms of this attempt by the Platonists to have a general notion of good as part of ethics. Aristotle's got 3 more, and then he offers a little olive branch, and he makes some very important comments as to methodology and ethics. And I'll look at those when I see you in the next video. Stay tuned.